9 black bulbous cauldrons were seen. It was difficult to get past them on the steep ascent. It was like a 45-degree angle or something like that. And they were filled with fire. And there was a buildup of a light green that filled the room like a haze. And in the final reading, there was a moment that I felt this warm soothing. And I wondered, because of the amount of pain that I had been in during the day, if it was blood. It wasn't blood, and I continued and just felt it. And in the closing scrying, I saw that the row of cauldrons was in a cave, and there was a slight green tinge to the trail or stairway or whatever you want to call it. And I felt further euphoria, but of an analgesic nature. When the timing of rituals is not precise, sometimes it is perfect when it goes forward and you go into it. And as much as one acknowledges that different names and such were used in the past in a particular archetype or regarding a particular entity, it's important to know that such and such in such and such context is actually worthwhile to leave, in that context. Because I'm sure there's plenty of rituals out there that, throw in a Aztec name and throw in a Chinese name and throw, that sort of mixing together. But the reference to the cycling seasons regards the future. The ancient Egyptians were more obsessed with order than the Babylonians. The Babylonians and the Egyptians sort of knew that nature could come at you in ways that, you're not prepared for. It was exposure to the Babylonians that put astrology and demonology at the forefront of Jewish thought. Of course, there were things prior to that, but, it made its way to the official list, is what I meant. The ancient Egyptians, they used names to assume a sort of power. And they both had this idea of evil, right? And you don't want to be evil in that sense. But then again, maybe you kind of, the Babylonians were a lot more acceptive of the negative, you could say. but I wouldn't moralize that if I was you. In 1969, the Council of Themis was established, and they wanted to get the different so-called pagans, so-called heathen New Age orders kind of working together. And a couple orders had an issue, and they wanted to make things sort of national. And the word sounds nice per se, but I understand how there could be issues with setting up like the equivalent of the what's like the Southern Baptist Convention or the Evangelical Convention or something like that, for neo-pagans. And there was talk about splitting the Ordo Templi Astartes into a couple groups, at least meeting on different nights, using different meeting places, because big gatherings for a seasonal can work, but the greater operations, one wants to keep the numbers down. So there was a reason why up to 13 was sort of the stereotype of a coven. To take it to a broader extent, woman and man are lesser representations of the greater, the sun and the moon, whatever sort of thing that you're looking at, the heavens and the earth, and the gendering of the forces of nature and that sort of stuff varies per culture. We need to be very important to consider that. And the Emerald Tablet, like seen in is it the Magic of Solomon video that reads that tablet, or is it the Rites of Magic video? But anyways, you got the same sort of thing that goes in Kabbalah. You have the different genders, you have the different ages, the parenthood and all that sort of stuff, and it talks about the whole thing as a magical operation connecting to the wider universe. Volume 1, number 4, is the spring equinox. Volume 4, number 1, is the spring equinox in 1975. And it's referring to the sacred marriage. The cup and the swastika pendant, paten, is exalted in the sun below, over 3 candlesticks. I do not think that the Thelemites and Wiccans are necessarily so unbalanced, but you do see that focus on the male more in Thelema and the female more in the Wicca. But I don't think either group of modern systems is really that thing. But you do need to balance the genders. Just like weekly sacraments and other seasonals than the nuptial rite, there are things about it that come through ritual instruction, certain contexts that are taught, even though some of the stuff is fully made public, like the seasonal rites of Baal and Astarte. Some instruction that one would get in the Church of Hermetic Sciences are the Ordo Templi Astartes. Would give it another angle. They do not see there having to be a different tree for good and evil. And in a way there isn't, right? Because, okay, good result, bad result of whatever type of person you are. This doesn't have to mean that you're meditating in a different mind, or a state of mind perhaps, but because I do believe in the 4 levels of creation. You got the the place that you look at ideas of deity, right? That are, the right idea of deities. So the divine manifestation realm. It's not the divine essence, it's sort of like the divine name realm. And then you have the light beings, you have the fire beings, and you have the humans. Well, the fire beings would be, I guess the other side, or the dark tree, or the shells, or whatever, or the fire realm, or however you're going to define that. But you don't have to work them in a different way. It actually works better magically to consider things as overlapping, right? You are human. Your soul is the same soul realm as the other animals and plants and things like that, right? And if you know how to work letters, and you can leave off this letter and play word games like that, or add a letter in and do something else different, you can do stuff with thought forms. And there's ideas about some magical children and stuff like this that perhaps the Bible leaves out. But I don't think by saying perhaps it'd be better to think, well, what if Abraham and some of these others had children that we don't hear about, right? Because just 1 or 2 kids, and some of the other ways the story goes, some of the accounts sound like there may be more to it, right? But you don't just speculate. Witches have hid things in the fiction, in the fables, in the myths, in the devices. Some people don't realize that a lot of our games, particularly the games of chance, come from different spiritual sources. And witchcraft is not the same thing as, I would not use it as just, alternative religion or something like that. There's an undercurrent, and that might upset people if they realize that. And they might realize, oh, well, some things really do happen. It's generally better to have a spiritual plan for your life rather than wander aimlessly. But regardless of what you do, it's probably best to form contacts of different sorts. And I don't mean, some Pokemon collect them all, or what's that commercial said? Got to have them all, or whatever the thing. I mean that you have a idea of inner travel, and maybe you bounce that out to an outer travel concept. This organization sounds like it does staging quite well, or at least better than most, right? And there's a tunnel in between the main house and the temple, and that's used to develop an effect of approaching to an inner sanctum and all that. There is a poem and an illustration that goes well with the idea of astral projection and all that. And it mentions sharing. And it also mentions separating yourself. You're no longer one of some sorts of persons. We can leave off a lot of the negativity. And, there's a comic here about, I guess it's about suppression, because you're hypnotized to do something or not do something, and then the contrary makes its way known in some way. Volume 4, Number 2, the summer solstice of 1975, has the icon of Gabriel on it. And one of the things that you find with some of these is that some of the stuff released later, well, we see where it was released to the public first. And, there also tends to be stuff in the latter that's not here, and stuff in here that's not in the latter. But this, at the very least, would show the development of the group. And I would say the Gabriel icon is the strength of humility. Walter T. Stace was right if you look at things from the perspective that the prophets weren't mystics. They weren't hypnotists and stuff. So they weren't the best at reciting their own stuff. I mean, they could recite it perfectly, but there were people who had the voice better, who, the tone and the volume and all that stuff. Certainly we can probably say that, right? But the spiritual force behind it had, a certain amount of effect, right? I would agree that Babylon isn't so much an exalted idea of goddess, right? It doesn't really put itself like in the names of God realm. It kind of puts itself somewhere else. And I say that would put itself sort of more in the sensual world. But I think you can think about that as more, the utter submission and some other aspects that are listed for Babylon, in the Thelema system. But I don't, for some people, the road is more disconnected from mere feeling, mere emotion. For some, that's definitely pretty solidly the part. But it's not about what you feel, what your emotions are, not even what you think necessarily. It's what you believe and what you do. I say that's more the path. Ultimately, I think we should accept what we can explain and what we can't explain, what we have control over and what we don't have control over. Differences in conclusion have, sometimes different sources. And I look at a lot of these magical texts, and it's supposed to be like Kabbalah, but it's not really even Hebrew, let alone the biblical language, which called itself Aramea, Aramaic. The Panarian talks about incest, cannibalism, and eating and collecting of the period, and the sexual emissions, and using that in sacrament. And that's probably why the Bible kind of mentions that, they don't even want to say what's going on, right? Because most people would never get the idea unless this was explained to them, right? Liber Agape and De Arte Magica are two things that are the monographs for the 9th degree of the OTO. The group astral travel is related to why Adamson's quest was written. Sometimes people go and come. Sometimes things are delayed because, decisions of leadership and stuff like that are delayed because people, you don't either you don't want to hurt feelings or you don't want to cause problems, and out of respect or whatever, you can drag things along. Sometimes people are fitting, but you don't get the following, and you have to abandon the branching off. And there's a comic, right, that really sort of pokes fun at the thing where people like, oh, they've gone wrong because the kid's not like them, but then again, maybe the kid is like them, following a different path, and that's why they're following a different path. I meant to say that volume 2 was the summer fall, so the winter solstice has Auriel, and Auriel seems to be presenting a feast, right? And the lament that we see makes clear that the Church of Hermetic Sciences is Rosicrucian, Holy Grail, Gnostic, and the Ordo Templi Astartes logo makes clear that it's a seasonal thing. It's a devotion. It's of a spiritual site. It's planetary, different stuff at the same time. And the Ariel logo, it's like the earth is a vault inside of the heavens. And what are you going to do with the surface?